Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, my name is Heather Myers, longtime TV journalist at CBS 8 News here in San Diego. Thank you for joining us here at Temple Emmanuel, and to all of our friends who are watching this live stream tonight, again, thank you for your commitment to our community. We thank you for your time and for your willingness to hear from both of our candidates tonight who want to be your representative for the 51st Congressional District. In elections, we often get focused on who is going to be the next president of the United States. And obviously that is important, but who will represent communities right here in San Diego on a national stage is vitally important. And it's imperative that you hear our candidates' positions on the issues that matter to you. Tonight we are going to hear from incumbent Representative Democrat Sara Jacobs, who I invite on stage. And her challenger is current mayor of El Cajon, Republican Bill Wells. The topics chosen tonight include, but are not limited to, economic challenges, crime, the chronic homeless issue, the border, abortion, and anti-Semitism. Tonight's Town Hall Candidate Forum has a structured format. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question, and if needed, we will reserve 1 minute as a rebuttal and to clarify thoughts if needed. Now, the candidates were not allowed to bring phones on stage, but they were allowed, as you can see, to bring notes if they wanted. They were not told about the topics nor the questions ahead of time. You, the audience, in fact, submitted excellent questions, and many of your questions will be asked here tonight. Just so the audience is aware, there will be no fact checks from me during this debate. You are more than welcome to applaud when you agree with a candidate's position on a topic, but as the rabbi mentioned, we are hopeful that the audience tone will remain positive tonight. In addition, I did reach out to both parties to get one question that the candidates wanted to each ask their opponent. And we will get to those questions at the end of the forum and conclude the evening with each candidate giving a 2-minute closing statement. So we begin with giving both Representative Jacobs and Mayor Wells 2 minutes to introduce themselves, and after a coin toss, we will start with Congresswoman Sara Jacobs.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. A special thank you to my parents who are here tonight instead of at the Padres game, which I convinced them to do instead. Like many of you, I spent the last week celebrating Rosh Hashanah with my family and commemorating the 1-year anniversary of the attack on October 7th. And I'm still grappling with the aftermath of that attack and everything it has meant for us as a Jewish community. The thousands of people who were killed that day, the thousands more who were injured and taken hostage who we still haven't gotten home. And the horrific rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia that we've seen since that day. I'm also incredibly concerned by the politicization of our community and our community's pain. Our community is not a political point to be won. It is not a trophy to win. So let me be very clear about where I stand on things. I support Israel's right to defend itself, including from new attacks from Iran and Hezbollah. And I also believe that the way Israel conducts itself matters. And I am concerned about the thousands of civilian lives that we've seen killed in Gaza, and I am concerned about the threat of a regional war that won't make anyone safer, including civilians in Israel like my family who still lives there. I'm incredibly proud of my record in my last 4 years in Congress. Even amidst the chaos, I've been able to really deliver for our community, passing bipartisan legislation on food security, on housing, on supporting our military service members and their families. And I'm really proud that in my first term in Congress, we were able to pass the biggest investment in climate change ever, the first gun violence prevention legislation since I was in elementary school, and an infrastructure bill that presidents from both parties have been talking about for decades. It has been the great honor of my life to serve as your Congresswoman, and I look forward to continuing to serve you for another 2 years. Thank you so much.
Congresswoman Jacobs, thank you. Mayor Bill Wells from El Cajon, 2 minutes to introduce yourself.
Well, hello, my name is Bill Wells, and I thank you so much for coming out tonight on a Padres night and a day after the massacres on October 7th. I want to take this few minutes just to tell you a little bit about who I am, because I know we're going to get into all the questions, we're going to get into all the policy, but somebody who's running for Congress is more than just policy, it's who they are as a person. I was born and raised in this area. A couple miles from here in Rolando area is where I went to elementary school. I grew up around here, I went to college here, got married here, did my education here. My whole life has been about taking care of people and serving people. My work in mental health really began when I was 8 years old, when a police officer knocked on my door one morning and told me that my father had taken his own life. I didn't know it then, but my life had been baked in that I would be working in mental health. I've spent my entire life doing that. I started after college getting my RN, then I get a master's in psychology and a doctorate in psychology, and I've started working in hospitals right here in town, got married, raised our children here, raised our grandchildren here, went to church here, and my life has really been about service. Somewhere along the way, I decided to go ahead and get involved in politics. I thought I would just offer myself up to work on a campaign, and somebody said, "You should run for office," and I said, "Oh no, you're crazy. You don't want me running for office." But I ended up running for office. In 2004, I became a planning commissioner. After that, in 2008, I got on the city council. I became mayor in 2013. Since that time, I faced many challenges, including a Black Lives Matter situation that turned out that we didn't have anything burned down or nobody got killed. We dealt with COVID, and I took the stand of telling my police department not to enforce any COVID regulations, and I fought against the county. And I'll continue as we go along. Thank you.
All right, we do have a lot to get to tonight, so I appreciate both of our candidates keeping track of the time here. Let's get to our first topic, which is the economy. And when most voters are polled, they say that this is the single most important topic to them. Question number one, inflation has significantly increased the cost of living, with Americans paying more for essentials like food, energy, and gas, especially in states like California. According to CBS News, the typical household now spends nearly $12,000 more per year just to maintain the same standard of living they had in January of 2021. What specific policies would you support in order to reduce or eliminate inflation and the consequences that it creates? We will begin with Mr. Wells.
Well, everybody's aware of the fact that the economy is a mess. And, they will tell you that if things aren't that bad, that you shouldn't believe your lying eyes. But when Donald Trump left office, it was a 1.9% inflation rate, and recently it's been up as high as 9.8. We've seen mortgage rates go up 167%, gasoline go up 89%, cost of food up 42%, on and on and on. And regular people are having a great deal of difficulty paying for everything. Now, some people will tell you that this is just a natural thing that occurs and there's nothing that can be done about it. But I can tell you it's our radical left policies that have brought us to this place, specifically our energy policies. Our energy policies have put us in a situation needlessly to be that we can't compete with the rest of the world, and we are destroying our own economy. We're doing it unilaterally. Very few of the other countries or even states are doing what California is doing to destroy our own economy. We need to import natural gas. We need to look again at nuclear power. We need to look at making ourselves competitive. We have to bring our jobs back, our manufacturing back. I'm not opposed to putting tariffs on countries like China. And I think that we need to get back into the business of building things and helping people be successful in America.
Congresswoman Jacobs, 2 minutes.
So you all will be unsurprised to know that the number one thing I hear from my constituents is about the cost of living here in San Diego. It is really expensive. In fact, we recently beat LA and San Francisco as the most expensive place to live, and that's not what I meant when I said beat LA. So I think that it's very clear that we need to address this cost of living issue, but I also think it's important to recognize where our economy really is. Compared to the rest of the OECD, the other major developed countries in the world, the United States has lower unemployment and lower inflation than any of those economies coming out of COVID. Now, does that mean that everything's perfect? Absolutely not. And especially for us here in San Diego, we know that the cost of housing and the cost of childcare are two things that San Diego families are really struggling with that have actually increased higher than the rate of inflation. And those are two things we weren't able to get done in my first term in Congress, weren't able to address. And those are two things that I am focused on addressing in my next term in Congress. In fact, addressing our childcare crisis is my #1 priority. Most families in San Diego, about 60% of families in San Diego who have young kids, spend more than 60% of their income on childcare. 60% of their income, and most of them are spending about 40 to 50% of their income on rent or mortgage. That's not sustainable, and it doesn't work for San Diego families. So I think we need to make sure we're investing in our childcare system to make sure families get the care that they need. That, by the way, our GDP loses over $100 billion a year in lost GDP because of families, because parents can't re-enter the workforce because they can't get the care they need. That gives our children the kinds of start they need to have a successful future, and that provides our childcare providers, who are often women and women of color, a living wage. And actually, before any of you tell me we can't afford this, let me tell you that for every $1 that we invest in high-quality early childhood programs, we actually save the US government, we save the federal government $6. That, to me, is an excellent ROI and exactly the kind of investment we should be making in the future of our economy.
Congresswoman Jacobs, thank you. You both mentioned housing affordability. Let's get to that question here. Housing affordability is one of the major issues impacting Americans, especially San Diegans. The Trump campaign claims that the influx of millions of illegal immigrants has driven up home and rent prices, and said a mass deportation of illegal immigrants is one way to lower the cost of housing. He's also spoken about opening up federal land to build more homes and zoning reform. Kamala Harris has talked about giving $25,000 to first-time home buyers and building 3 million homes in 4 years. She's also mentioned freeing up some federal land to build housing. What policies do you support in dealing with the housing crisis? Congresswoman Jacobs, 2 minutes.
Look, the cost of housing here in San Diego is unsustainable, as we said. And I think there's a lot that we can be doing at the federal level to help that. It's one of the more frustrating issues for me because so many of the solutions are at the state and local level, but there are some things we can be doing at the federal level. First of all, not demonizing immigrants, who, by the way, are who power our construction industry and make it more affordable to build more housing. But second of all, figuring out how we in the federal government can make sure that we're supporting increasing the supply of housing that we know we need here in San Diego. So I sit on the House Armed Services Committee, and one of the things I'm working on there is working to make sure our Department of Defense is actually providing the housing that they need for the service members here in San Diego. We are a proud military community here in San Diego. In fact, we are the largest military community in the country. But right now, DoD actually houses about 10% of their families in military housing, and the other 90% they give a stipend and have them rent a home in our community. Now, that's not good for our service members because often they can't find a home that they can afford, or they're commuting really long distances, which is not good for our readiness. And it's not good for our community because it means it's putting extra pressure on our housing market that already has too much pressure on it. So I'm working with DoD through the National Defense Authorization Act that we write every year on the House Armed Services Committee to encourage DoD to build more housing on military land, and then to make sure that the privatized military housing that does exist is of high quality. And I've passed numerous bipartisan bills that get at this issue, and we're going to continue working on it in my next term.
Mayor Wells.
Well, the immigrant issue is really an issue, and it's not demonizing immigrants to say that there are 20 million people have come into this country that are competing for housing. We're spending over we're spending over $8,000 per person to put these people up in hotels. This is money that could be going to young families and people like my kids who can't afford to buy houses in California. They could be getting first-time home buyer programs. In fact, California is giving our first-time home buyers to illegal immigrants. It's not demonizing illegal immigrants to say that. If you were to buy a house today, before you even started buying that house, there's $180,000 worth of fees and regulations on that house. How can people possibly be thinking they can purchase housing? And because of the radical environmental policies, we are living in a world where people like Sara Jacobs do not want you to drive a car. They do not want you to live where you want to live. They don't want you living in the country. They want you living in densely urbanized areas, not owning anything, and getting taxed every time you turn around. This is not the way that we make housing affordable. And I'm all for helping our military. I have a son who's fought in special forces. I'd love to help him. But there's a whole lot more happening in the country than just childcare and what's happening in the military.
Can I respond?
I did mention off the top that we are giving 1 minute if certain questions come up that the candidate would like to respond to. Would you like to take the 1 minute rebuttal?
I would, thank you. So look, I think it's undeniable that it's too hard to build housing here in San Diego, and we need to address that. But let's be clear, almost all of the regulations that my opponent just talked about are state regulations. And if he wants to run for state assembly, I would welcome that. But that's not something that we do here in the federal government. And at the federal level, the things that we can do is that we can impact mortgages. That's something we do in the federal government. We can make sure we use federal lands. And we can try and incentivize addressing some of these regulatory issues that make it harder to build housing, like my colleague Scott Peters' bill that would incentivize building more housing near transit that I am a supporter of. Those are the things we can do from the federal government.
Due to time, let's move on to topic 2 here, and we touched on this a moment ago, but we're going to dive in now. This is the border security and immigration topic. I spent a lot of time on the phone today talking to a representative from Customs and Border Protection, so I'm going to share some information that I found. Many border cities across the country are seeing a drop in the number of encounters with those attempting to cross into the U.S. illegally since President Biden signed an executive action back in June. The exception to that, though, is San Diego, where the data shows that there have been almost 311,000 encounters with Border Patrol so far in fiscal year 2024, just in San Diego County. The overwhelming majority was single adults, but there have also been more than 6,700 unaccompanied minors. Where do each of you stand on the issue of border security and the mass migration we have witnessed over the past few years, especially here in San Diego? Just keeping track of who started first. It looks like Mayor Bill Wells, you're starting first with this question.
Okay, this border's an easy one. We had almost 20 million people come across the border illegally. We have 500,000 people in America right now that are criminals that have committed rape and murder and theft. We have 300,000 kids that are missing right now, obviously involved in sex trafficking. We are having trouble in almost every aspect of trying to have a normal life and raise our families with the border. We are currently in California, and I'm sorry that it's focused on California, but currently in California are giving housing allowances to people coming across. We've got rapes happening in New York City. We've got little children being murdered and raped. And my opponent voted against the Laken-Riley Act. She voted no on that. She also voted against the Police Our Border Act. And she voted she voted no on prohibiting non-citizens from voting.
If I hear boos and hisses, you will be removed from the room. Sit on the beamer. Sorry, I apologize.
Am I finished or?
Alex?
1 minute is left.
Okay.
Okay. Obviously, this is a big issue. People will say that we're a nation of immigrants, and certainly we are a nation of immigrants, but people came over legally. They came over in an orderly fashion. We need to go back to the policies where if you wanted to come from another country, you go to the country next door to you, you apply for asylum, you get a court date, and you go through the process. That way, the United States of America gets to decide who's coming in, they get to look into your background, and they get to decide whether or not you're a good fit for America. And obviously, my wife's a Greek immigrant, and when her family came over, her family wouldn't speak Greek because they wanted to assimilate into American culture. I think it's incumbent upon us to be asking the people that are coming over to assimilate into our culture, not to set up your own little old country back in wherever you're living, but to become Americans and to be proud of being Americans.
So I think we need to talk about what these supposed policies are that my opponent wants us to go back to. Those policies were the policies that meant that when the spirit of St. Louis came to the United States to seek refuge of Jews fleeing the Holocaust, they were turned away. That's what the asylum laws that we have in place right now today were created because of. The asylum laws we have today were created for the very reason that we saw during the Holocaust that Jews could not come to the United States to seek political refuge. And I think that it is important to me as a Jewish American, to my Jewish values, to what we are reminded every year on Passover, that we were once strangers, not our ancestors. That's what the wicked son says, right? Our ancestors. We each of us were once strangers, and it is our job to welcome the stranger. So let's talk about what's really happening at our border.
May I respond to that?
So let's talk about what's really happening at our border. I visit our border at least once a quarter as a representative of our federal government. I talk to CBP, I talk to Border Patrol. And what everyone will tell you is that the way to get a more orderly and humane process at the border is to expand the legal pathways that we have. We haven't had real immigration reform since before I was born, and I am young, but I'm not that young. And we need to have an immigration policy that reflects the needs of our economy, that reflects the needs of our community, and that reflects the needs of our families who want to bring their family members over. We do need to fix the asylum system by making sure we have more case officers and judges so that people can go through that system more quickly. And we need to make sure we have the technology at the border to address the crises of precursors and fentanyl coming over the border, that 99% of which is coming over by United States citizens at legal ports of entries. Those are the kinds of things we actually need to do to address the issue at the border, not demonize immigrants, which all of us are descendants of.
Congresswoman Jacobs, thank you. Mayor Wells is requesting a 1-minute rebuttal.
Well, I just want to make it clear, I wasn't really talking about Jewish immigration. I don't think we've had a Jewish immigration problem happening right now. We have an immigration coming from Central America. We have an immigration problem coming from China. We have an immigration coming from countries that want to kill us. And if you are so naive that you can't look at that and say that people coming from all these countries have ill intent and are currently committing crimes all throughout the country, Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment complexes. This is a big problem. We can write it off and say this is no big deal. This is no different than the Irish or the Jewish coming over in the 1800s. It's extremely different. And we need to wake up and take care of this, or we're going to lose this country completely, and a lot of us are going to lose our lives.
I'm sorry. Heather, can I respond to that?
All right, we need to move on to the issue of fentanyl, and Representative Jacobs brought this up a moment ago. Earlier this year, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said fentanyl was the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 49. More people died from a fentanyl overdose than cancer, car crashes, or violence in that age group. Representative Jacobs, what have you done to address the crisis of fentanyl coming over the U.S.-Mexico border?
Well, thank you for that question. First, I think I need to address something that my opponent said, which it sounded like he was saying that we only want white immigrants in this country. And to me, that is deeply, deeply, deeply offensive. Asylum laws were put in place to protect people fleeing from political persecution. And that's true in lots and lots of places. And what we need to be doing is addressing the root causes of why people feel like they need to flee those places, instead of demonizing the people who come here for safety and security, like almost all of our ancestors did, like my ancestors did, when they came to Ellis Island seeking freedom and political asylum because they were persecuted for being Jews. So let's talk about fentanyl. So I visit our border every quarter, as I said. I recently visited the Long Beach port to look at what they're doing to address the fentanyl precursor issue, a lot of which comes through our ports here in Southern California. 99% of the fentanyl that comes to this country is coming through legal ports of entry and by United States citizens. That is just a fact. So it's true that we need to do more to address this issue. It's also true that demonizing the wrong people, demonizing asylum seekers and immigrants, is not going to address that issue. In fact, in 2020 and 2021, we saw when asylum was restricted, we actually saw increased levels of fentanyl being trafficked across the United States border. That is, again, a fact. In fact, I'm pretty sure that statistic is from the Department of Homeland Security. And so there is a lot that we need to be doing to address this issue, but it is not to demonize the people who are coming here to seek security and freedom, the very thing that makes our country what it is and makes our community what it is.
Mayor Wells, same question. What have you done as mayor of El Cajon in your city to deal with the issue of fentanyl? And what would you do if you win this election?
Well, unfortunately, there's not much we can do in the city of El Cajon because this is thrust upon us by the federal government. And I want to make it clear that I'm not demonizing the people that are coming over. I understand why they're coming over. I'd want to come over too. Who I'm demonizing is the far left radical progressives like President Biden, who she supported, even though she knew he had dementia, and told us for on and on that he didn't. My umbrage is with them turning a blind eye and just letting the country be overrun with people. And now the number one cause of death for people between 18 and 40 is fentanyl poisoning. So when your kids go to a party at college or high school, the chances of them dying of fentanyl are much, much, much higher than dying of being shot or dying of all these other problems that we're facing in it. And I think that is a direct response of immigration policy. If we're going to deal with the fentanyl problem, which we have to, because it is unjustifiable death of our young people. If we're going to deal with that problem, we have to deal with immigration, and we have to deal with the radical left policies that do not look at who they are, let everybody come in, and have no rules whatsoever about who's coming in, and place footsies with the cartels 100%.
Representative Sara Jacobs with a 1-minute rebuttal.
Yeah, thank you. Everybody who comes into this country, including people who come here seeking asylum, receive rigorous vetting. And a lot of the reason why we know the statistics that Mayor Wells is citing is because we have caught them at our southern border. But I want to talk about something else, actually. The rhetoric that we hear demonizing immigrants is dangerous to our immigrant communities. In fact, we are seeing the consequences of that right now in Springfield, Ohio. It is also dangerous for our Jewish community. Because I don't know if you all remember, but I do, reading the manifesto of the person who went and shot the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh. But it was about how it was Jews who were bringing immigrants into this country to replace white people. And that's why he felt like he needed to go into the Tree of Life synagogue and kill the Jews there. So let's be clear about what this kind of rhetoric, demonizing immigrants, means for all of us and the safety of everyone in our community.
Okay. We are going to move on to topic number 3, which is the issue of crime. All 3 questions in this topic, if we have time to get to all 3 here tonight, were questions submitted by you, the audience members. Let's start with question number 1. Proposition 47 passed in 2014 here in the state of California, aimed to reduce certain nonviolent crimes from felonies to misdemeanors. Many say this has contributed to rising crime in California, including an explosion in retail theft. What is your public stance on Prop 47? In addition to that, what is your public stance on Prop 36, which was written to undo some of the regulations in Prop 47? This audience member says, even though these are state propositions, combating crime is a nationwide issue. Mayor Wells.
Well, Proposition 47 is a perfect example of the experiment of leftism that has failed in this country and has left us fail. Proposition 47, for those of you who don't know, basically decriminalized almost all crime. Took things that were serious crimes and felonies and turned them into misdemeanors. What that did was it made California the most attractive place in the entire world to be homeless. People from all over the country came to be homeless in California. We have 175,000 homeless people in California, whereas Texas has 25,000 and New York has 25,000. The reason they come here is because they can steal up to $950 a day. They can use drugs openly. They can sell drugs openly. They can have sex with an unconscious person. They can do crimes that would get them in prison almost anywhere in the country, and they can do it with impunity in California. And what makes matters worse is the far-left progressives like Sara Jacobs tells us that the cities are not allowed to use any of the tools at their disposal that they normally do to protect their citizens. Tools like arresting people for selling drugs. Tools like arresting people for committing sexual acts against other people, violent crimes, theft crimes, property crimes. We're not allowed to do almost anything, even to the point where we were told we weren't even allowed to break up encampments. So we were told that we had to let people live and die on the sides of our roads because that was compassion. Well, let me tell you something. That is the furthest thing from compassion. It's not compassion to the people living like that way, and it's not compassion to the people trying to live in these communities. Like I said, I want to go back to, I want to make sure I was real clear about this. It's not because it's a federal or state issue. It's because far left thought has infected our nation and is causing these kind of failures all throughout the nation. And California is just one example.
Congresswoman Jacobs, 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I don't like when my state colleagues tell me how to do my job, so I try not to tell them how to do their job. But I'm happy to tell you what I've done at the federal level, where we have done none of the things that Mayor Wells is alleging. In fact, one of the things I'm really proud that we've done is pass a bill that gave more support to small police departments like the police department in El Cajon and La Mesa so that they would have the resources that they need. And let's talk about homelessness. I think it's really important. It's also untrue, factually, that people move to San Diego or California in order to be homeless. In fact, there have been multiple studies now, including a very recent one by the University of California, that show that the majority of people who experience homelessness here in San Diego are from San Diego. And the majority of people who experience homelessness here in San Diego and in California experience it because of a lack of income. So one of the most important things we can be doing to address homelessness is to make sure that we're actually addressing poverty. And I'm really proud that in my first term, we passed a bill that actually cut childhood poverty in this country in half. We were able to do that. And let's also be clear, criminalizing homelessness doesn't actually solve the homeless problem, it just moves it somewhere else. So when my opponent criminalizes homelessness in El Cajon and makes it so it's illegal to feed people who need to be fed, which, by the way, is deeply unreligious in any version of the Bible that you've read, all it means is that I get phone calls from my constituents in Spring Valley instead of my constituents in El Cajon. It doesn't mean that we've actually solved the problem. To solve the problem, we need to make sure we have adequate housing. We need to make sure we have a safety net that addresses the needs of our community. And we need to make sure that we're actually investing in what we need in our community, not demonizing people who just can't make it ends meet because it's too expensive to live here in San Diego.
Mayor Wells with a 1-minute rebuttal.
Well, I'll leave it up to you. So here was my situation. We had a hepatitis A outbreak and people were dying, and the epicenter was at a park that we had in El Cajon. And so I closed the park to feeding people because there was poop on the ground from the homeless people. And hepatitis is transmitted through poop. And so people were putting the poop on their hands and putting it on their food and then passing hepatitis around. There were 11 other places that you could still get food. We closed down one. That's disingenuous. She's lying to you. I also want to say, I understand when somebody doesn't want to have them told how to do their job. I spent 25 years in the psychiatric emergency room doing psychiatric evaluations. Nobody else in this room has done that. And I can tell you, I have worked with thousands, tens of thousands of homeless people. The number one problem with homelessness is drug and alcohol addiction. And let me tell you, they come from all over the country. I've talked to thousands of them. They come here because this is the great place to get benefits, and they know they won't be hassled by the police here.
Thank you. Let's get to another audience question. Yeah. We did notice the microphone cutting out. I don't know if you want to turn it toward you.
Sure.
It's not that type. It's a wireless issue.
Is there an AV guy? I wasn't the AV guy in high school, but let's hope it doesn't. I'll try to talk loud.
Yeah, maybe if you set it there, it might work a little better.
Maybe if I pull it out here. Okay.
Let's get to Representative Jacobs here for a question from the audience. In June of 2020, when you were running for the 53rd District, a Voice of San Diego article quoted you as saying that the city of San Diego needed to rebalance its priorities and budget and demilitarize the police, and that you would have voted to redirect money from the San Diego Police Department budget to mental health and homeless outreach services. Can you clarify your position? Do you support demilitarizing or defunding the police?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I spent a lot of time talking to our police department about what we need here in San Diego. And all of our police officers and all of our police department leadership will tell you that they don't want to be the ones dealing with mental health crises, and they don't want to be the ones dealing with homelessness. They don't feel like that's their job, and they're not best equipped to do it. And that's something that we all agree on. And so they will tell you that we do need more investments in homeless outreach teams, in mental health teams, so that they aren't the only ones addressing this problem, and we are not criminalizing this problem, but actually solving it. And so that's something I've worked closely on with our police department to make sure that we are getting the funding that we need from the federal level, to make sure that we are investing in our community in the things that we need, like mental health services, like addressing the needs of our homeless population. Now, let's talk about safety, because safety means that we're all safe. And that's why I proudly voted to make sure that small police departments like the police department in El Cajon gets the support that they need to have what they need to be able to do their job. And I spend a lot of time thinking about this issue. You know, when we talk about crime, a lot of what we're talking about actually is gun crime, right? And we know that the #1 cause of gun crime in our community is actually domestic and intimate partner violence. And just today, I visited a shelter for some of our folks who are experiencing domestic violence. And I'm really proud that by passing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, we were able to close a loophole, the boyfriend loophole, that meant that people who were having intimate partner violence by a boyfriend and not a husband couldn't get the gun restraining orders that they needed. That saved lives. In fact, after passing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, we saw a 13% drop in homicides nationwide. That is real progress we're making by actually addressing issues, not by demonizing or using slogans, but by actually working with our community members, with our police department, with our fire department, with others to get the support that we need from the federal government for our community here in San Diego.
Mayor Wells, in interest of time, I'd like to ask you this audience question, which is along the exact same topic that Representative Jacobs was just saying. During the BLM protest in 2020, you were interviewed by KUSI News, and you described defunding the police as foolish. Can you elaborate on your stance now, and should local police department budgets and their officers be responsible for the thousands of calls that come into 911 centers for people experiencing a severe mental health episode?
Yeah, I actually think it's completely wrong for any community we talk about defunding the police. I understand enhancing community policing and bringing more mental health resources in the policing, that's fine. But we don't defund the police. And in fact, in El Cajon, we haven't defunded the police. But I just want to set the record straight, because she has a record that she's voted on. When Congress voted to condemn defunding the police, she voted no. When Congress voted to stop the Fentanyl Act through the HALT Act, she voted no. The Police Act of 2023, no. Protect communities from DUI, no. DC Crimes Act, no. Detain and deport aliens, no. Detain and deport aliens who assaulted police officers, no. There's a violent crime in America every 6 seconds. You can put a positive spin on it all you want and say that things are getting better, but I think we all know that it's not. You know, constantly the Biden administration and the far left wing of the party tells us that we shouldn't believe our lying eyes. We should not believe that the economy is bad and the inflation is bad and taxation is bad and that things are more dangerous than they used to be and homelessness is a big problem. We shouldn't believe that. We should believe statistics. Well, I think you can believe your own eyes.
Congresswoman Jacobs for a 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. When I was sworn into Congress, I swear an oath to the Constitution. And one of the things that the Constitution protects all of us from, guarantees all of us as United States citizens is due process. So yes, I vote against bills that I think infringe upon due process rights and try and punish people before they have access to legal proceedings. That, to me, my job is upholding the United States Constitution. That's literally what I swear an oath to every 2 years. And that will continue to be my guiding light, whether it's on this issue or any other issue.
Let's move on to the topic of the homeless crisis, which I know we touched on here a moment ago. California is facing a significant homelessness crisis. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which conducts homeless counts every 2 years, there are currently 181,399 homeless individuals in California, representing 28% of the nation's homeless population. This figure marks a nearly 40% increase from 5 years ago. What are your thoughts on these numbers, Mayor Wells?
So homelessness is the worst problem that we've ever had. And the reason is because we're treating it the wrong way. Everybody tells us the problem with homelessness is housing. And that's why we've had a housing first policy that doesn't treat any other aspect of homelessness, just has spent $25 billion on housing. The problem is that housing is up 40% even after we've spent $25 billion on housing. The problem with homelessness, and you can ask any cop or any firefighter, any ER doctor or any ER nurse or any paramedic, and they will tell you the same thing. Homelessness is 100% about drug and alcohol addiction and mental health issues, and us turning a blind eye and letting people die on the side of the road. Homelessness is solvable. We have to first have the political courage to admit that it's about drug and alcohol abuse and not about housing. We have to change the laws so that we can get people off the streets. If they're willing to get off the streets, get them in the treatment. If they're not willing to get off the streets, then still get them in the treatment. We do that already with 5150s for mental health problems. And then if they really won't get off the street, then a stint of incarceration might be what has to happen if people are determined to stay on the streets. And then we have to spend a lot of money, unfortunately, because we're going to have to build a lot of treatment facilities to take care of the mess that we've created by allowing homelessness to take on the proportions that it has. And one last thing I want to say about homelessness is I used to believe that people that had the opposite view of mine just didn't get it. They just didn't understand because they didn't work in the field. I have now come to believe that they know exactly what's happening. There's so much money involved. This is the homeless industrial complex, and people are making billions off this, and they have no incentive to fix the problem.
Congresswoman Jacobs, 2 minutes.
Sure. So look, congratulations, everyone. We have something we agree on. I agree we need more mental health treatment. We need to make sure we're investing more in mental health care. But let's also be very clear, that's not going to solve our homelessness crisis. There have been many, many studies, including a very comprehensive University of California study that was recently done, that showed that the #1 cause of people experiencing homelessness is a lack of income. It's not mental health, it's not substance abuse. So what do we need to do, right? Because it's clear it is an issue. We have an issue here. We have way too many people experiencing homelessness. So there's a few things we need to do. One is that San Diego doesn't get the resources that we deserve because the HUD funding formula doesn't actually account for the way homelessness actually presents here in San Diego, and Congressman Peters and I are working a lot on trying to get this funding formula fixed. The second thing is we have the largest population of veterans experiencing homelessness in the country, and that's why I'm proud to have co-led a bill, the Return Home to Housing Act, that would increase the reimbursement rate and increase the number of transitional housing opportunities for our veterans, because we know that they need that care. I'm also really proud that current Congressman, future Senator Adam Schiff and I have a bill that would create housing navigators to make sure that people are actually able to access the housing supports that they're eligible for. And one of the things I've been really focused on actually is families with children who are experiencing homelessness. They're actually the fastest growing population of people experiencing homelessness in our county. And most of them experience homelessness for less than 3 months at a time. And it's almost always due to some event, a medical expense, loss of a job that they didn't account for. So Senators Manchin and Murkowski and I are working on creating a whole of government strategy to combat homelessness for families with children, including creating a new office at HHS and making sure that we're giving school districts the funding they need to be able to help their students who are experiencing homelessness. And this is something I think we can very tangibly do very quickly that will help a lot of people here in our San Diego community.
Due to time, let's move on to the next topic, which is the topic of abortion. Abortion is no doubt a complex, highly emotional topic. Where do you stand on abortion since the overturning of Roe versus Wade, since the issue of abortion back down to each individual state to decide on? And if you are pro-choice, should abortion be banned at a certain week of pregnancy? Representative Jacobs.
Sure. So as a 35-year-old woman, reproductive health care is my health care. And basically, the thing I spend the most time talking about with my friends and peers is who's having a baby, who wants to have a baby, who doesn't want to have a baby, and then how you can afford that baby once you have it. And so for me, this is very personal. I remember exactly where I was when the Dobbs decision came down, where I was shaking with fear, where these 6 Supreme Court justices thought they knew more about my body and my health care than I did. And let's be clear, reproductive health care is a kitchen table issue. In fact, sorry, Mom, but for many years, the only doctor I went to was my OBGYN. And that's true for many, many young people. And so to me, I think at no point in a pregnancy do I or any other politician or government entity know what's best for a person, know better than them and their doctor. And that's what I think our policy should be. And let's be clear. Let's be clear, this is not just about giving it back to the states. These are real consequences that we're seeing. Amanda Dexter should be alive today, but she wasn't because she couldn't get the care that she needed, the very normal reproductive health care that should be available to every person in this country, whether they live in California or Texas or Georgia. And I do not believe that any politician or any government should have the right to make that decision for a family. It should be up to that family and their healthcare provider and not the government to make that decision. And that to me is what real freedom means.
Mayor Wells, 2 minutes.
So we live in California. California has abortion written into the Constitution. You can have abortion up until the day of birth. I'm not sure what the issue is. In California, you can have all the abortions you want. So these are things that politicians like Sara Jacobs use to divide us and to say, you can't vote for him because he's pro-life. Well, I am pro-life, but I also understand that about 75% of the nation believes that there should be some kind of an abortion laws available in the United States. We are one of 3 countries, North Korea, China, and America, that allow abortion up until the day of birth. Most countries are more civilized. Countries like France and Spain and Japan that have somewhere between 12 to 14 week abortion bans. But it's not even an issue because the Supreme Court has already decided that it's up to the states. And in California, it's not an issue. So I'm not sure why we're talking about it. But I do want to talk about these scare tactics and these lies that we're talking about in the case in Georgia. That woman who died, she did die, but she died of sepsis. And the reason she died of sepsis is because she was given the abortion pill, RU-486. RU-486 was given to her without any follow-up. She went home. She had fetal tissue inside of her uterus, and the babies died. She went to the hospital. For some reason, they waited 20 hours to give her a DNC, and she died from sepsis. That's bad medical care. That's malpractice. It has nothing to do with abortion. And frankly, I resent these scare tactics that are designed to separate us. It is designed to separate Americans from Americans and say you can't vote for anybody else other than the far left because you have to protect your right to abortion. That ship has sailed. We don't have to worry about that right now. You don't have to worry about that right now. And these lies are unconscionable.
Congresswoman Jacobs is asking for the 1-minute rebuttal.
You know, I remember being called hysterical when I told people that Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned. It's very convenient to call women hysterical when they are telling you that their rights are about to be taken away. let's talk about what Republicans want to do. Republicans, my colleagues in Congress, have introduced a federal abortion ban, and the majority of the Republican conference has signed on to it. A federal abortion ban would override any protections we have here in California, including constitutional protections. So let's be clear that our abortion rights are on the line too. Now let's also talk about this so-called abortion to the point of death, which is ridiculous. I haven't been pregnant yet, but all my friends have, and from my understanding, it's not the most pleasant experience. Nobody goes through that for 8 months and then decides, hey, actually, just kidding, I didn't want this. When you have to get an abortion after you've been pregnant for 7, 8, 9 months, it's because of a medical issue. And that should be a medical decision between you and your doctor.
Okay. Can I ask a question? Can I ask just one question?
Well, I'd like to stay with the flow here, and if we have time at the end, can we circle back to questions? Because
Of course.
I know that we are
Sure.
really running against the clock here. This next topic is hugely important, and that's why I want to get to it here. It's the topic of Israel. It's our sixth topic tonight. Yesterday marked 1 year since the horrific Hamas-led terrorist attack at the Nova Music Festival and surrounding neighborhoods in Israel. Hamas is still holding 101 hostages in Gaza, and some of them are Americans. Today, October 8th, marks 1 year since Hezbollah began firing rockets into the northern part of Israel, and now the tension between Israel and Hezbollah and Israel and Iran is becoming more dire by the day. There is intense debate about what the U.S. policy should look like at this moment. What is your position on the U.S. supplying or withholding money and weapons to Israel? Mayor Wells.
I'll just wait till that's finished. If you could start the timer now. Yeah, thank you. No, I'm absolutely believe.
Let's just take a moment and see if somebody could pause their
Okay.
phone. Okay, it looks like it's been handled.
I absolutely 100% believe that we have an obligation not only to Israel, but to ourselves to support Israel in every possible way we can. They are the only democracy we have in the Middle East. Americans have been patient with Hezbollah. Americans have been patient with Hamas. Americans have been patient with Iran. We've always talked about, well, let's work out some kind of a two-state solution. But we should know by now that there is no two-state solution because the only solution that the enemy of Israelis will accept is total annihilation of the Jews. Every country that has participated in anti-Semitism has ended up on the ash heap of history. America has to stand up to Iran. And our policy has dramatic consequences of what happens in Israel. And I talk back about the Obama administration starting with this nuclear Iran deal and giving the $8 billion to Iran, and they're still holding on to that like that's a good idea. Iran wants to kill us. They want to kill you. And say one last thing about the two-state solution. After what happened on October 7th, there can't be a two-state solution. You can't live side by side with a group of people that will cut the babies out of pregnant women, that will burn children in microwaves, that rape girls till they're cut in half. You can't live side by side with people like that, at least the administrations that will do that. So Israel has an obligation to us and to themselves to eradicate Hamas, eradicate Hezbollah, and perhaps eradicate Iran.
Congresswoman Jacobs, let's give Congresswoman Jacobs 2 minutes.
Well, thank you for asking the question. I'm deeply connected to my Jewish roots and to Israel. My family lives in Tel Aviv, my aunt and uncle and my cousins, and every other summer growing up, I would spend there, and every other summer my cousins would come here and we'd go to JCC summer camp with some of your kids. I have been to the north and the south of Israel. I've been to Gaza and the West Bank, and it's a region that I hold very, very close to my heart. I also sit on both the House Armed Services and the House Foreign Affairs committees, so I spend a lot of time on this issue, on the intricacies and on the details, and on really thinking through what we need to be doing and what the consequences are of the different decisions that we make. And I firmly believe the only way to make sure that there is a safe and secure Israel, that I care deeply about their being, is to make sure that there is a Palestinian state where Palestinians can have dignity and autonomy. And I will always stand with Israel's defense, and I have voted numerous times to make sure that Israel has the Iron Dome refills that it needs, that it's getting the THAAD, the Terminal High-Altitude Missile Defense System, that it's getting the David Sling refills that it needs. But let's also be clear, many people, including thousands of people who protested in the streets in Israel yesterday, do not believe that the policies of the Netanyahu government are actually making Israel safer. And that's evident by the fact that 1 year on, there are still 100 hostages that are being held. And the most successful way we have gotten hostages back is through a diplomatic solution. So I will never apologize for saying that we need to try diplomacy. Diplomacy is the way that we address issues, and it is the way that we make sure we don't end up in a catastrophic regional war that will put my family in Tel Aviv more at risk than they were. And I do not believe that the policies of the Netanyahu government has made Israel safer today than it was on October 6th.
We're out of time. Let's go to an audience question here. In an open letter published by the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, or JINSA, it's a think tank, 85 U.S. military leaders who are retired military leaders, called for the U.S. support of Israel and no ceasefire until Israel's operations have succeeded in creating conditions for its citizens to live in peace and stability. Do you advocate for a ceasefire either in Gaza, Lebanon, and or Iran? Representative Jacobs.
Sure. I haven't read this letter, and I don't know these 85 retired people. As a member of the House Armed Services Committee, I talk to our United States military constantly. I am constantly being briefed by them on the situation, and I can tell you that the best advice of our United States military is that a ceasefire is the only way to de-escalate tensions and make sure that we get our hostages back, and that the way the Netanyahu government has prosecuted this conflict has not made Israel safer. Now, that's not my opinion. That is the opinion of our United States military that they have shared directly with the Israeli military. And it's the opinion of many Israeli military leaders who have publicly spoken out, including the current Minister of Defense, who have said that Prime Minister Netanyahu does not have a real strategy for what he's doing in Gaza. So let's be clear, this is not my opinion. And this is what many, many military leaders, both Israeli and American, have told us. So I do believe that a ceasefire is the best way to get our hostages back and to get humanitarian aid into Gaza and to de-escalate regional tensions so that we don't end up in a catastrophic regional war that won't make anybody safer. It just won't. Listen, we have tried regime change in Iran before. It didn't work very well. It is not a strategy. And when the United States or others have engaged in regime change, whether it was in Iran, whether it was in Libya with Gaddafi, whether it was during the Arab Spring when we saw many, many leaders toppled, the situation did not get better. Regime change is not a coherent policy strategy, and you cannot just hope that you're going to get something better because you don't like what you have right now.
Mayor Wells with 2 minutes.
So I'm all for a ceasefire. I'm looking forward to it. Once Hamas is eradicated and Hezbollah is eradicated. And Iran has been defanged. Look, I'd like to tell you it's all about you, but it's about all of America. Iran is not just coming after Israel. They want to destroy us too. And we've worked out a way for them to get a nuclear weapon. That's a bad idea. I'm all for Israel going in and destroying their ability to have a nuclear weapon. I want to say one thing about Benjamin Netanyahu. Like his policies, don't like his policies. When he shows up in the United States of America and comes to Congress and he's in a wartime situation, you show up and you listen to what he has to say.
Let's allow Congresswoman Jacobs a 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. Let's be clear. If I thought there was a military solution to this problem, I would happily entertain that idea. But the fact of the matter is that there have been almost no instances of violent extremism being eradicated by a military solution. I worked at the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations at the State Department, where I worked on violent extremism in places like Nigeria at the height of Boko Haram. And what we know from all of these instances is that the best way to ensure that you eradicate violent extremism is to address the underlying grievance. And in this case, that's the lack of self-determination and dignity and autonomy for the Palestinian people. Now, one of the things that I hear from my friends and colleagues in Israel is that Bibi Netanyahu believes, and he tells people his selling point is that he can do whatever he wants in the West Bank, in wherever, and still get U.S. support. And in fact, we were asked by Israeli leaders to not dignify his address by attending because they believed that that would hurt their efforts within Israel. And many of you have read my op-ed. Many of you, actually, many of the young people in your lives have thanked me for that op-ed. Talking about why I didn't attend that address, and that is something I stand by.
Thank you. Thank you. Topic 7 is about anti-Semitism. The first question. Families in this room tonight and who are watching on this live stream right now are deeply concerned about anti-Semitism. What do you say to Jewish students on college campuses and even local junior high and high school campuses who say they don't feel safe? And what should Congress be doing? Congresswoman Jacobs.
Yeah, I too am deeply concerned by the rise of anti-Semitism, and I myself have felt it. The jokes about my big nose and my frizzy hair, I got called the K word at a bar. I was cowering, hiding in the House chamber, worried for my life when people wearing shirts that said Camp Auschwitz, Team Auschwitz, and 6 million wasn't enough were coming to try and kill me because of my role as a United States representative. I understand the very real rise of anti-Semitism we're facing right now, and I have had many conversations with our young people on college campuses here in San Diego and across the country. In fact, I had a meeting with ADL in my office today about this topic. But what I know is that painting a broad brush on this issue is not actually going to solve it. What we need to do is fully fund the national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, which does things like fully fund the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, that makes sure that when people experience anti-Semitism, they can actually get it investigated and adjudicated. We need to make sure that we're investing in education for our young people so that they understand the Holocaust and they understand what caused it and they understand what it means for our population. But I also believe that as a member of the United States Congress, it is my job to uphold the Constitution. That is what I swore an oath to. And the Constitution protects speech. It protects speech even that we don't like. And the Constitution protects hate speech. What it doesn't protect is hate crimes. And that's why it's so important that we need to be funding offices like the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education and getting federal grants like the federal grant that provides support to local police departments to be able to investigate and prosecute hate crimes. Federal grants that my opponent claims he would not allow to be accepted here in California anymore until we, quote unquote, get homelessness and crime under control.
Mayor Wells, 2 minutes.
The United States government should use every ounce of strength it has to protect all of its citizens, and that includes Jewish citizens, Jewish students and Jewish people. We should not be allowing anybody to be harassed. We should not be allowing anybody to be discriminated against. And we certainly shouldn't be having people stop from going to their place of work or where they go to school. And And colleges that turn a blind eye to this or engage in this in any way should lose their federal funding. And when the United States Congress has the ability to vote on an act condemning anti-Semitism, people like Sara Jacobs should probably vote yes instead of no like she did. And look, I'm a big believer in free speech. I think free speech is really important. In fact, it's the far left through social media that's trying to take away all of our freedom of speech. But when it gets to the point where people are intimidated to the point where they fear for their lives, that crosses a line. And let me tell you something, let's be completely honest. If African American students were being harassed and not allowed to go on their campuses and being called names and threatened with their lives, do you think we would put up with that for 1 second? We would not. And there's no difference in my mind.
Sorry, can I respond?
Representative Jacobs, I see that you are asking for the 1 minute rebuttal, but this next question has a lot to do with what was just discussed. I would like to dive into this so we can stay on track here, because this is an audience question that was directed to you. Representative Jacobs, on May 1st of this year, you voted against H.R. 6090, titled the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which passed the House on a bipartisan basis. The bill sought to define anti-Semitism using the definition adopted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Can you clarify why you voted against this, and is there a line between free speech and hate speech?
So constitutionally, hate speech is protected as free speech. Again, hate crimes are not. So when it crosses into a crime, that's the difference. And under Title VII of the law, universities have a right to constrain protest to a time and place agnostic to the topic. And so that's what we need to make sure is happening, agnostic of the topic, that time and place restrictions are being abided by, but that we are not constraining people's speech. But let's talk about the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, because I know it's something many of you have called me about, and I'm always happy to have this conversation. I have real concerns about the IRA definition being codified into law. The author of the IRA definition has deep concerns about the IRA definition being codified into law. And that definition is something that we as a Jewish community do not have consensus on. And so the idea of the United States Congress codifying it into a law before we actually have consensus on the definition, to me, doesn't make any sense. But the actual reason I voted against this bill is because I heard from many, many scholars that adding this definition in the way that it was would be seen as constraining free speech and would bring the bill to the Supreme Court, and that it had a real risk of the Supreme Court overturning all of the Civil Rights Act, all of our civil rights protections. And the last time we saw the Civil Rights Act go to the Supreme Court, it did not go in a way that I think many of us would want it to. And as a representative of the United States government, I am always thinking about the third and fourth order consequences of the decisions we're making. And I'm very concerned that the very things that we think we are putting in place right now to protect us as a Jewish community are the very things that can be used to not support us, to go after us in the future. Now, I do support the Protecting Students on Campus Act. I do support many other things that would actually make sure we're providing our students with the resources they need, including by fully funding this Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education so that they can get instances of anti-Semitism investigated and adjudicated quickly.
Mayor, thank you. Mayor Wells, how would you have voted on this? And in your opinion, how do you define the line between free speech and hate speech?
Well, I would certainly have voted to protect Jewish students. I condemn anti-Semitism. I want to just say it right now. I condemn anti-Semitism. And I want to tell you...
I also condemn anti-Semitism, if that wasn't clear.
And I want to tell you, I'm not Jewish. I'm evangelical. And I want to tell you that evangelicals all over this country are praying for you and they care about you. Look, I think it's pretty common when people don't want to vote about something, they get a lot of esoteric, very overly intellectualized answers. It's not that difficult for me. We protect people. You know, we protect gays on campus, we protect Jews on campus, we protect blacks on campus, we protect Christians on campus. We treat each other with respect and we love each other, and we stop people from doing bad things. I don't think it's that hard.
I'm keeping us on time here, and I'd like to go to the portion of our evening where we have an opportunity to hear the questions that each candidate submitted for their opponent to be asked. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we asked both Representative Jacobs and Mayor Wells to submit one question to ask their opponent. Ms. Jacobs, here is the question from Mayor Wells, and again, you have 2 minutes. Congresswoman, can you explain your rationale for supporting non-citizens' right to vote in local elections and what you see as the benefit?
Sure. So I think that my opponent is referencing the SAVE Act, which is a bill that we voted on in Congress. And let's be very clear about something. It is already illegal for any non-citizen to vote in a federal election. It is already illegal. Now, in a federal election, it is. And here's what the SAVE Act would do. Can I have a show of hands? How many of you changed your name when you got married? Mom, raise your hand. I know you did. Okay, thank you. So the SAVE Act would actually make it harder for you to vote because your birth certificate and your driver's license wouldn't match. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about this bill. It's not about making it so that non-citizens can't vote. It's about making it harder for people who are actually eligible to vote to be able to exercise that right. It is already illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. And what we have seen from the FBI, from every intelligence agency in our government, is that the United States elections have some of the lowest levels. There is almost no fraud. There is almost no issues in our federal elections. This is not me telling you. It's the FBI and the CIA and every intelligence agency.
Let's allow Congresswoman to finish her thought, please. Thank you. Mayor Wells, 2 minutes to respond to this.
Well, I'm really relieved that there's no fraud. Thank God. I thought it was really a big problem. Look, you know, the consequences of 20 million people coming into this country are going to be significant. We've talked about the consequences to the economy. We've talked about the consequences to crime. But it's also going to be a consequence in the way we do democracy. Because those 20 million people, for the most part, are going to go to big blue cities. And even if they don't vote, even if we work that out, I believe that there is a huge move towards having them vote. But even if they don't vote, it's going to change the congressional appointments, the allotments. Places like Chicago, Los Angeles, big blue Democrat cities, I think by design, are going to get several new Congress people, which is going to change the balance of power in Congress forever. So we should be very clear. Right now, it seems like a lot of people saying, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Non-citizens voting, that seems like crazy. I never even thought about that." Come on. This is by design. And if we don't step up and stop it right now, you're going to lose the country.
Yeah.
Congresswoman Jacobs with a 1-minute rebuttal.
I'm sorry, but this rhetoric, this language is so incredibly dangerous. We know that it motivates people like the person who shot up the Tree of Life synagogue. We know that replacement theory is deeply anti-Semitic. It is rooted in all of the anti-Semitic tropes that we all have known our entire lives about masterminding the idea of bringing people over to replace the votes of white people. But let's also be clear, Donald Trump has said that if he loses this election, it is the fault of Jews. He didn't say it's the fault of Democratic Jews. He said it's the fault of Jews. And every single Jewish member of Congress signed on to a letter.
We need to stay on topic here. Let's give Congresswoman Jacobs the moment to answer this question in the rebuttal,
What
please.
Donald Trump said, and there are many, many transcripts and quotes and videos of him saying this, is that If he loses the election, it will be the fault of the Jews. That is what makes us less safe as a Jewish community. And that's why every single Jewish member of Congress wrote a letter calling out this dangerous, dangerous rhetoric. And that's why it is so disheartening to hear this rhetoric today, the day after October 7th, in a synagogue.
Mayor Wells, here's the question from Representative Jacobs, and again, you have 2 minutes. Mayor Wells, do you believe Donald Trump lost in a free and fair election in 2020?
I don't know. It doesn't matter anymore, does it? He's running. He's going to win in a couple of months or a couple of weeks. You know, goes back to that same abortion thing. These are these specialized questions that are designed to get you and to make say you can't vote for him because he's pro-life. You can't vote for him because he's worried about election integrity. I'm not going to fall for that. I'm talking about real issues like whether your kids die of fentanyl, whether there's 400,000 or 300,000 kids being sex trafficked right now, whether you can afford to make your mortgage payment, whether you can afford to make your insurance payments right now. These are things that we should be focusing on. You know, one of the things she said which bothered me is she spends most of her time thinking about reproduction rights. As a congressperson, you should be thinking about how to make my life better, not about reproduction rights. I know Donald Trump's not popular. I get it. I wasn't in favor of Donald Trump in the beginning either, but it's a binary choice between two different people. And I know you don't like him, but I am not Donald Trump, and this is not a referendum on Donald Trump. This is a referendum on where we take the country.
Congresswoman Sara Jacobs, 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, in the words of Tim Walz, that is a very damning non-answer. And many of you know I was elected in 2020, which means that my 4th day in office was January 6th. And on my 4th day in office, when I still didn't even know where the bathroom was, I was hiding under my seat, putting a gas mask on, introducing myself to my new colleagues. We later found out that it was 30 seconds from when I was pulled across a hallway to when the insurrectionists got there. And those insurrectionists were wearing shirts that said Camp Auschwitz and 6 million weren't enough. Those insurrectionists were there to try to kill me, a representative of the United States government, because of lies like the one that my opponent would not condemn and would not say is a lie. And my parents, the only thing they saw on television here in San Diego was that a San Diego woman was shot and killed in the House chamber. My parents had hours where they didn't know if I was gonna be okay because of the lie that my opponent refuses to condemn and refuses to say was a lie. Now, every single agency that has looked at our election in 2020 has said it was a free and fair election and that there was no fraud. So let's be clear. Joe Biden won the election in 2020. Now, I'm sorry if my opponent, a 60-year-old man, doesn't think about reproductive health care very often, but those of us who are young women whose reproductive health care is our health care, yes, it is something that is top of mind, and it is a kitchen table issue because the decision if, when, and how to have a child is one of the most important decisions you can make in your life and will have huge consequences for the future, including for your economic future. And so, yes, I will not apologize for thinking about reproductive health care as the important kitchen table issue that it is.
Let's give Mayor Wells an opportunity for a 1-minute rebuttal.
I got to apologize for being old, and I got to apologize for being a guy. But look, 75% of the people in America say that the country is going in the wrong direction. Our polling says 75% of the people in this district say that the country is going in the wrong direction. If the country is going in the wrong direction, we've got to make a change. Her group, the far left radicals, have had the reins for quite a while now. They've screwed up the border. They've messed up the economy. They've messed up law and order. They've messed up homelessness. They've messed up everything that they've touched. The country is falling apart, and everybody knows it, and you all say that that's how you feel. It doesn't make any sense to keep doing the same things over and over again if you know what you're doing is not working. I've been a very successful mayor. I fought for my people. They love me. I've won one of my elections with 84% of the vote, and that's because they like me.
Thank you, Mayor Wells.
And I thank you very much for your time.
You're getting to the closing remarks before our time is here, but we're actually at that point. We're going to conclude tonight's debate with 2-minute closing remarks because Representative Jacobs won the coin toss. She will have the final word tonight, so we begin with Mayor Bill Wells.
Well, again, it's time to make a change. We've tried this experiment for quite a while, and it just does not seem to be working. I know that a lot of things have been thrown around tonight. You know, we brought up the specter of abortion. We brought up the specter of Donald Trump. All these talismans, these things that are supposed to make me unlikable and unwinnable. But my history of being the mayor of El Cajon has been one of solving problems and being accessible to the people. I've also been one who's always stood up and done the right thing. I never intended to get involved in politics. I'm a doctor. I wanted to help people. I got in politics because I wanted to extend that helping into another area. But I always said to myself, if I'm going to do the right thing no matter what, and if that means that at some time I'm going to have to stand up and do something that's unpopular, I'll do that. And if people want to send me home, they'll send me home. If more people did that when they went into government, we'd be in a much better place. Everybody's focused on the next election and winning more political points. I think we're at a point where we can't do that anymore in America. We have to do something different, and we have to take the reins and do the right thing, not only for our country and the world, for ourselves.
And the final word tonight will be from Congresswoman Sara Jacobs with 2 minutes for a closing remark.
Well, thank you all again for spending your evening here while the Padres are playing it in a playoff game. Is it still 6-1? Someone tell me. 6-5. Okay. I'll watch after. But look, I think what we heard is that it's very clear that we need a new generation of leaders in Washington, and that's what I'm very proud to have done. As the youngest member of House leadership, I've shown that we can do things differently. And even amidst the chaos and dysfunction of Congress, even from the minority this year where Democrats were not in charge, I've been able to get real things done for our community, from housing to childcare to food security. Those are real things that are impacting real people's lives. I've been able to bring home millions of dollars through constituent casework. I've been able to bring home millions of dollars making sure that our community gets the federal grants that it needs. And I've been able to make sure our community gets billions of dollars in federal infrastructure money that presidents from both parties have been talking about for decades. That's the kind of record I've been able to do in my 4 years in Congress. Now, I am a third-generation San Diegan, born and raised. In fact, my great-grandparents lived right near here in College area. And it has been the honor of my lifetime to represent my community, to represent our community in Congress. And I am deeply honored for the trust that you all have put in me, and it would be my true honor to earn your vote for another term in Congress. Thank you so much.
Well, we have reached the end of tonight's candidate discussion forum. Round of applause to our candidates for the 51st District, Representative Sara Jacobs and Mayor Bill Wells. I'm Heather Myers, reminding